takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get through this with the students. So we try to make sure we're doing a thorough job, and this is, I mean, obviously one of the more important areas. I mean, learning all the nuts and bolts of, you know, how to actually do all the different wheelhouse stuff is great, but at the end of the day, this is kind of what trips a lot of our groups up, even when they're submitting events or just kind of in their day-to-day activities. So, you know, really and truly, the end goal of this presentation is just to kind of give them kind of some bare bones. What is risk management? What do we mean when we say that? How do they go about actually doing risk management by using a risk matrix? So we explain what the risk matrix is. And then we kind of talk through a lot of different possible scenarios. Usually hand out, and now gone to 3 different scenarios that I'll give them in terms of different events that they may be putting on. They're all based on things that we've done here. It's like Spring Fest or Fall Fest type of an event, and then I think we have like a group that's traveling over 25 miles. So, you know, common activities that we see a lot of our groups doing. So now everybody's super excited. I put the pictures in. I mean, you guys may enjoy them as well, but they're mostly for the students. So, try to do something to keep them a little bit more entertained during this presentation. So, but yeah, I mean, basically, like I said, we talked to them a little bit about risk management. So it's, you know, just telling them, hey, this is basically trying to identify what types of behaviors or risks are inherent within the different activities that you're doing, and then taking steps to mitigate those. We cover all these different topics for them, so kind of our, you know, most risky types of behaviors and things. Explain to them that, you know, the first thing that everybody thinks about when you say risk management is always the physical aspect of risks. And so I really try to kind of explain to them that there are at least 4 other types, and, you know, a lot of times they can kind of bleed or, you know, blend themselves into other types of risks. So if something may initially be a physical risk, and especially if it like actually manifests itself as a physical injury or something like that, that may ultimately, you know, have an effect on your reputation. You may have, as a result, maybe you damaged facilities, or maybe the facilities caused that physical injury. There might be financial repercussions as a result of a physical type of risk. So, I mean, they all kind of intertwine and work together a lot of times depending on what's going on, and so we kind of talk through that and help them better understand that aspect. And then, you know, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the other thing is, like, I try not to get them too worked up about, like, thinking of every little thing that could possibly ever go wrong for their event. That's not really the goal. You can see in the second one, you also want them to assess what's the probability of that happening, okay? So I don't want to see something, you know, when they turn in their event form, it says there's a possibility of a Sharknado going on, because that's not really realistic. So, you know, or planning, you know, like, it may be realistic to plan for a hurricane in this environment, but if they're traveling all the way up to Wisconsin, probably not really a realistic, you know, risk. So, kind of knowing where they're going, what they're doing, and then assessing the probability of it actually occurring. And, you know, obviously we want to identify controls and ways to mitigate those risks. The more likely they are to occur, and the more likely they are to inflict, you know, grave danger or bodily injury or, you know, whatever it may be. So here's kind of an example of a risk matrix. We essentially, for those of you that have, I think most of you have probably done this before and you've seen within Wheelhouse, I also printed off some examples for you. That's what you got, your handout is. So those bolded sections are basically what we asked them, and so they somewhat match up with our things here. So basically, we asked them to list all the activities that are associated with your event. And we asked them, okay, what are the different risks? We even put in parentheses. Think of all all 5 types, because otherwise they tend to forget some of those. And then, you know, we basically teach them through this training and say, okay, well, you need to evaluate the seriousness and the probability. We're not going to actually ask you to document, you know, how you went about determining that, but then we are going to ask you to document how you go about those methods that you're going to manage the risks. I also talk about with them in terms of, a lot of our groups, I would say, tend to be very good in their proactive or forward-thinking skills when it comes to risk management. So they'll say, okay, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z in order to prevent something from happening. Like, that's great. Okay, that's a good start. Where a lot of times we see them kind of stumble a little bit is on their reactive risk management plan. What's going to happen? What are you going to do if you did X, Y, and Z to prevent something to happen, but it still happens anyway? Because that's why it's called an accident. It's not an accident because you planned for it to happen. It's an accident because, oh shoot, it accidentally happened. So a lot of times they tend to not necessarily think of the more reactive steps in order to manage risk, and so we talk through some of that in terms of, for example, on one of these, the middle one, they're going to say everybody's going to be able to swim. Okay, well, it doesn't really say how you're going to ensure that, but I guess if you ask them that, well, what happens if they went and had a fajita lunch, and then they went out there and they cramped up, and now suddenly they know how to swim, but now they're kind of incapacitated to swim. So one of these things, in this middle section would, well, maybe you should have a lifeguard, right? I mean, we're going to require that anyway because it's the pool, but that would be one of our suggestions, and having them actually think about that and say, like, we're going to have a lifeguard just in case. Somebody pulls a muscle, somebody, anything. What if they fell out of the boat, hit their head? Well, they knew how to swim, now they can't. So just kind of being proactive and thinking about things like that. So just kind of going through this whole, or not going through the whole thing, but the handout, the first two, if you kind of read through those are ones that I kind of picked out, and not trying to pick on anybody's particular group. I didn't catch any names, but you can probably make assumptions based on who, the activities of who they might be. But just trying to find some examples of ones where people submitted them and we're like, not quite hitting the mark that we'd like to see here. And so, for the first one, we could definitely do a better job of maybe outlining a little bit more about the actual physical injuries instead of just kind of lumping it all in and saying there's any kind of physical injury, like what are we talking about? So if we're playing soccer, we're talking muscle strains or, ligament sprain, maybe broken bones, that kind of stuff. And then, also there may be facility risks, right? What if you're, depending on what field you're on, there could be holes or divots or all sorts of different things that could be on that particular facility, depending on where you are. So, and methods to mitigate, keeping drills low contact, that's great, but again, are you going to have a first aid kit? Do you have somebody, that's first aid certified? A lot of times they do, and so it's just kind of getting them to think about that and actually put it down on paper. Because the other thing too is that, and sometimes we get a little bit pushback on this, is why do we have to write everything down? Why is all that well, if it's not documented, it basically doesn't exist, right? So if, as Shelley mentioned before, while we try to do everything we can to keep people out of court cases and court of law, that may end up happening. And if it does, you're going to be in a lot better position when this case goes to court, probably years from now, to actually have documentation as to what it was that you guys talked about, So just saying oh yeah, we talked about it, and you might be able to remember that the next week, but what happens when, they put you on the stand and say, okay, well, you're the advisor, or, these officers said they did this, I don't know, I can't remember, I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, so that's kind of why we'll ask them to be more specific, even though sometimes we can kind of infer, or we know based on past precedent that they may do very similar types of activities. We want it in writing because it's proof that they thought it through and that they are saying that they're going to do something. And then the third one on there is one of our better risk management plans, and so you can kind of see they even kind of outlined. They said, okay, these are physical, and they went through step by step, and then for their methods to mitigate. They also went very step-by-step and kind of, so yeah, that's one thing too, as advisors, you want to not only see if they're missing something potentially, but also, you know, are those things matching up? Did they mentioned risks in their section, and then they didn't really talk about what they were going to do to handle it. It's like they did a good job identifying, but now we didn't do a good job at like identifying ways to mitigate. So that's not real good either, because now it's like, well, we knew that was a risk, but we didn't take any steps to actually do anything about it. So if it actually happens, we're kind of in a bad situation. For this, we just talked about just the different penalties, what exactly the terms are for different drinking penalties and all of that. Those people are very underage.
That's my baby picture.
Yeah, try to inject a little humor because it's not exactly the most light and airy topic, so. Deeper there. So Shelley mentioned, you know, there's university rules that relate to student organization and, you know, whether the situation, depending on whether they can have alcohol, they can't have alcohol. These are kind of all the different things that we're going to look at and that are actually in those rules. It'll say, hey, if you're going to have it, that's great, but you're going to need to make sure that you have a lot of methods of control in there to make sure that things don't get out of hand and that we don't wind up with a bad situation, because we know statistically that alcohol is pretty much the #1 drug of choice for any kind of bad thing that happens when it comes to college students. So,
and if y'all ever go in and read Appendix 9, it is very, very lengthy. Well, it's hard to understand. I think they do it on purpose because they figure students will start reading it and just decide, never mind, it's not worth it. Because really, I mean, you read through some of them and you're like, what exactly are they talking about here? So,
yeah, I mean, I think we read through it and we're like, oh, this is a little unclear, so we went and got guidance from College Station. Well, what do you guys interpret this as and everything? And so, but yeah, I mean, we have more recently, I think, had some events that do involve alcohol, like Maritime Wall has had it, but you know, we mitigate that risk by, you know, having the host of the forum or the site, yeah. They are the ones that bring in, you know, the licensed bartenders. We have somebody that's not like a student that's checking IDs or something like that. It's a police officer or the bartender that's, you know, trained to do that. You know, you have a way to make sure that the participants, if somehow they do get impaired, that, you know, there's a good solid method for getting them home safe, all those kinds of things that you need to think about. So.
and drinks are $10 a pop, so they're not
Yeah.
anyway.
Right. In true, you know, Galvez or whatever fashion, they're not exactly cheap drinks either. They're not dollar or wells or anything. Okay, so basically hazing, you know, there's this nice, long, lengthy definition, but more or less it comes down to putting somebody at risk and their safety at risk for the purpose of pledging, initiating into a group, or making them maintain membership in that group. That they have to do those types of things at an educational institution. So. So really kind of what I summarize it up for them is like, if you are making your members do something in order to be part of your group or club, let's talk about why that is. You know, like, because sometimes, you know, maybe it's not necessarily hazing. I mean, you know, you can see the definition there, but like a lot of times we try to go back to what is it that you're trying to accomplish with this, and maybe are there alternative activities that we can provide that will accomplish the same thing, or maybe it's like, well, we're trying to do this or accomplish this by doing X, and we're kind of looking at it like, yeah, but can you see why that's maybe not what you're accomplishing, and you're actually accomplishing something, you know, that's not really good, it's not team bonding or providing a good experience or anything.
Joe,
Yes.
I just want to point out, as long as we can imagine that filling out all these forms hurts the student's mental health, isn't some of what we're making them do hazing? If you want to be part of this club, you're going to have to fill out these forms, but I really don't want to. It really is cruel. I know I'm not making a joke. I'm just pointing out, if that's even at all interesting, how do you know what counts as hazing for any of the club's cases?
does it have a direct purpose and relevance to the organization? Filling out the forms to risk management is a direct purpose. Wearing a tutu around campus. So I mean, that really, and it's a
No,
very good
it's
question.
classic cases.
It's a
But
very
what
good-
about when
Here's an example. If I've got the ROTC group that every morning they're going and they're doing, 50 push-ups, not hazing.
Yeah.
If the chess club is doing that before a tournament, now we're talking about hazing.
So I have a question, example. What if clubs make freshmen fill out these forms? Because they're freshmen.
Well, I think you'd have to get back to the organization and say, why would you want the youngest members to be doing things that risk management are going to impact the entire organization? If you're doing this as some type of,
These danger assessments.
Oh, but only officers.
on the officers, so that kind of, to your point, I mean, you get back to, and that's where you as advisors, what is the purpose behind what you're doing, and does it relate directly to our organization?
Okay,
You
so
have
I'll
to
give you
get
my
this
real example. Getting the soccer balls from the field. Freshmen have to do it. I say it's hazing, stop it.
No, I'd say, if the new ones are, that's a legitimate thing that's affiliated to the organization. So if the newbies are the ones that carry the gear out there, I don't see that it's hazing because it falls within the confines of the purpose of the organization. And if you look at, you go back to the definition of hazing, it goes to any intentional or reckless act. Bringing the soccer ball is not going to be intentional or reckless. So it's within that. Now, if they've got to, once again, doing something that may embarrass them, that they've got to do it in their underwear, okay, now we've suddenly crossed another line. Does that help?
Yeah, the reason I thought it was hazing in this case was because of how they talked to the freshmen. That's what made it defined for
I
me.
think
if you're doing
it's
a-
borderline, I would think. I mean, a lot of
Meaning
times.
it's considered a humiliating thing not to do.
Well-
It's considered something that, you're a freshman. So it was treated as hazing.
I think carrying, but if you've got somebody who's walking along berating them, well, now we're talking about a different thing. You're talking about mental health and, what is the purpose of, are we trying to recruit members to our organization?
Exactly.
So you as an officer, why are you mentally berating these
Right.
folks? And we don't need that as part of the organization. I'd rather have these 10 freshmen enjoying their experience than have you. And that a lot of times will stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the intent? What's the purpose of it? Is it putting them in danger, either mentally or physically? And I think a lot of times too, I mean, like, I don't think it necessarily hurts to like ask those questions and then maybe nip something like that in the bud and say like,
Yeah.
why are we doing this? Is it accomplishing what we want to accomplish? Because like I'll tell our students too, I don't think something like that, probably not hazing when you really get down to it. I don't know that it would get, anything in the court of law or anything. But what it does do is it starts kind of establishing that behavior that we're going to say, well, if the freshmen have to do that, okay, well, what makes them not have, maybe we're going to make them do some other stuff too. And I think hazing kind of lends itself to this, not only, as we get through here, it talks about, creating a cycle and kind of that false sense of control and everything. And it also tends to, like, I think a lot of times, you always hear the end result of a really bad hazing case. I don't think a lot of times that organizations started off with that as its intention or its purpose. Like, there's a case law in one of the books that I read where they were basically hazing the pledges or whatever for a fraternity, and somebody eventually went and got I don't know, they were peppering them with all sorts of stuff, and somebody went and got oven cleaner and poured it on them, chemically burned them. I don't think at the beginning of, when they were talking about what they were doing, that they said, hey, okay, by the end of this, we're going to go get oven cleaner and pour it on them. But it does create that okay, well, we're doing this, that's really fun, okay, what else we got around, and now you've got a problem because now you just kind of start piling on. Or it starts, this year it starts with that, next year they start adding on to it, next year they add on to that. Oh, we had to do this when we were freshmen, let's make them do this now too, So that's, to me, where it kind of gets concerning because, without it being kept in check, so to speak, and, they're always kind of, especially when you talk about competitive people with sport clubs and stuff, there's that kind of one-upsmanship and competitive nature, so okay, well, we had to do this, let's make them do this. That to me is where it starts getting into the more dangerous territory for
You also need to think about, because time and time, my experience when we've explored these, quite often it's not the seniors, it's the sophomores. It's the ones who are a little bit younger and don't have the full scope, and a lot of times the seniors make up with an idea that has one intention and then it can get warped a little bit. I saw one of our, we've got a male leadership group here called AGS, and they had their pledges wearing white T-shirts, and So I saw that, because I saw ags and they were getting signatures, and the goal of it was that they needed to walk around and all the current members needed to sign to show that they'd met these, pledges. Good intention, you gotta go around and do it. So now be careful, because if somebody starts writing things other than their signature, because that's what was starting to happen, I'm like, now if you start writing degrading stuff on there, you just moved what was a good one into hazing. And so as soon as I communicated that to the upperclassmen, the leaders there, they're like, oh crap, we need to think about that, we need to go back and visit with all of our sophomores. I'm like, okay, that's how you keep yourself busy. Because it's, unfortunately, as I said, the seniors aren't the ones who do it, but guess what, the seniors are the ones who are going to be brought in on the investigation, because they're the officers that didn't keep a close enough patrol. So that's where that constant advising, you thinking about where the gaps are. Good question, so, yeah, appreciate it.
Any other questions about hazing before we move on to the next one? This is another real enjoyable one to talk to a bunch of 18 to 20 somethings about. So because I'm sure they love talking about sex with me. But I think it's actually it's really been positive though, because I started off by saying, okay, how many of you have heard of Title IX? And at this point now, a lot of hands go up. And so that's, I guess, at least refreshing to see that they're at least becoming more and more aware of it, as it's become a very big focus within the university setting. And so we just kind of talked through the definitions, and then in particular, we go through some of these statistics about sexual assault and everything. Here at the bottom again, I talked earlier about how, again, alcohol is also obviously very present in this type of behavior. We talk about consent and how that's looked at very differently now. It's much more of a it has to be ongoing, and there is no more no means no. It's a yes means yes. There has to be an affirmative consent. It's not the absence of a I don't want to do that kind of thing. And then this one's the one where I think it gets really difficult to kind of explain to them and have them understand, because I think, as college students, a lot of times they are in situations where, maybe they aren't really mentally or physically in the best conditions to be making decisions. And so we talk about, how to maybe put themselves in better situations and be aware of somebody that may be incapacitated according to what's now the law, and how that's kind of shifted over the years, and that's a much more, I think, difficult thing to discern these days than it maybe had been previously. Some of them, the whole idea of brownout, most of them know the whole blackout thing where they just don't remember anything. The more recent term is like brownout, where you basically kind of go fade in and out. Your memory fades in and out across the evening. And so just trying to kind of give them some tips and stuff. If you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden they're like, well, how did we get here? Or where were we before this? And but they can remember other parts of the evening, or they might be experiencing brownout. Probably want to make sure that that person is not, going home with anybody, or you're not taking them home at the end of the night. And then, I really try to play up, as I think we should, the whole just family concept that we have here, the egg core values about, staying in groups, looking after your friends, because I firmly believe that those are probably some of the best methods that we can have outside of trying to get everybody educated in terms of helping people prevent this type of behavior. So, and I tell them too. I've certainly been trying to be pretty candid with them and say, I've been in those their same shoes where, you're looking at somebody and you're like, that person should not be driving home. And sometimes it's not, I tell them, it's not easy always to take the keys away from somebody, or say, hey, maybe you shouldn't go home with that person because you look really intoxicated and I don't want something bad to happen to you. And I try to talk to them about, that's not an easy thing to do, or say, sometimes people can get really belligerent and angry when they're drunk. They don't want to give you the keys and stuff. And I just try to communicate to them. It's like, at the end of the day, you have your own morals and ethics. You have to look at yourself in the mirror the next day. If you're getting a text the next day and you find out that something happened and you felt like you could have done more to stop it, you're gonna have to live with yourself with that. And so try to keep that in mind when you get into this situation. And maybe it's not necessarily something easy, or maybe you tried to get the keys for a while and then you finally just said, you know, that person's just being too big of a jerk, whatever, I give up. We talked about, you know, if either they have been sexually assaulted or they know somebody that's been sexually assaulted that's come to them and made that report, you know, what to do in that event, make sure they're aware of, you know, Ken's area for sure, the other methods within the university to make that report, seek medical attention, all that kind of stuff about their resources.
The important thing also, when we talk about Title IX, is all of you as advisors serving in your role, you're required, if you find out, if you hear to your officers or whatever, you're required to report. I don't know if you touched on that, but you're required, even Ken, who is one of the groups excluded by Title IX as a counselor, if he hears it during the role as an advisor, he also falls into that reporting responsibility. So it is required by law. You can report it to me or as a deputy, but Jeff Boyer and HR is our campus Title IX person.
And I think the other thing that's important to mention with that is that I actually recently had somebody start kind of telling me a story that I thought was going to go down that road, and I told her, okay, I need you to stop, and I want to make sure that you know that I am a mandatory reporter about what I think you might be about to tell me, because had I not done that and she had continued, I would be forced to report it to TAMUG, and then the university is forced to, you know, start taking action. And so
Finish the rest of your story, what you told her, though, because that's relevant. You just didn't sound like here.
no. Yeah, thank you. Right. So I told her stop, and I said, I'm not trying to jump to any conclusions or make an assumption about what you're going to tell me, first of all. But if it is possibly regarding this, that, you know, I want to make sure you know that, and if that's not what you want, then you may need to stop there. However, let's make sure that, you know, if that's the case, and again, I'm just going to go off an assumption here because you haven't told me anything further. And it ended up being that she didn't want to say anything because it was very, you know, she was basically like, I don't really know what happened. I don't want to go down that road, so thank you for saying that. But I made sure that she got in touch with Ken or somebody from Ken's shop. She ended up making an appointment the next day and everything. And so, and we actually had an issue where that person was kind of coming around, hanging out when she was working and stuff. And so we talked about, you know, making sure that she, you know, she felt safe in her job and everything, what to do in the event that, you know, that if she ever felt like she wasn't safe, contacting campus police in that event, and letting me know if we need to work around like with her schedule and stuff so that we can avoid some overlap. Obviously, it's very hard to do with as small a campus as we have, but trying to make sure that, you know, we that she has the resources that she needs and everything. And I told her that, you know, Ken, you know, as Todd mentioned, Ken or Daisy, Diane, you know, the other counselors, in their capacity as counselors, are the only people really on campus that can be confidential in terms of something like that. So I recommend that she go and talk with one of them because they don't have to make that report, whereas I would. And of course, I said, you know, I'm glad that you felt comfortable enough, you know, confiding in me in something like that, kind of, sort of, but not really. And, you know, to let me know if at any time she wanted to, you know, continue talking about that or anything, to let me know. So yeah, it's just kind of trying to make sure that you definitely get them to the people that can be confidential if that's what they want, and just kind of make sure they know about their resources.
So are we as club advisors mandatory reporters?
Yes.
We are.
I mean, I think technically, just
As
about
university
anybody in
employees.
the university other than counselors are.
Yeah, if you work at the university.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also,
Really?
aren't all citizens required to report felonies? Is the felony not report a felony? Isn't that already the law? It's interesting to have this other.
I don't know. But I know as a university employee, you're required to report something like this because of the whole Penn State and other situations where people have been told things and they don't send it up the chain of command essentially. So
Okay, so, sorry. So, it sounds to me like the best course of action, because my students come to me all the time with nothing like I've been raped or anything, but
right.
my
But
kids
they could.
confide in me about a lot of
They
stuff.
could. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, tell me, somebody advise me. I'm thinking that I like what you said. Okay, wait. You just need to know that if you tell me this, I have an obligation to report this to the university. And who would I go to?
Jeff Boyer.
I'm sorry?
Either myself or Jeff Boyer. If it involves student,
Generally,
it's gonna be
students,
me,
student to student.
or you can go to Jeff and Jeff's gonna forward it to me. So,
I swear, I live behind the 8 ball. How did I miss this?
it's a fairly new law, when places.
It's all in our training, it's in the online training for the whole.
But a lot of people do
What
this.
training is that called?
The other thing to keep in mind too, and this is kind of an FYI, not really necessarily related to this training, but that covers student workers as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's,
That's what Shelley just
and that's
said.
rough.
But if you have a student that comes to you and tells you that she doesn't like her roommate because her roommate is doing this stuff, if that's not a crime, what the
Right.
roommate's done isn't a crime.
No, no.
If she says her roommate got drunk at a party, or his roommate got drunk at a party and this action happened, it may be a felony. But them saying, I don't like her, she's, or I don't like her, that boy hurt my feelings, and I think he raped the girl, then that has to be reported. As ugly as that, and simple as that, but
Here's where some of that came from. The research was that to get some of the larger campuses, that there's some research that supports the idea that there are some people who are serial rapists. And maybe this person is aware of this over here, and this person's over here, because it's unfortunate you go to campus, College Station certainly operates below that national average, but when you go to Ohio State or some of these others, it's I hate to say it, but a target-rich environment for a serial rapist. Lots of young people who don't know a lot of other people getting very, very drunk. So what this does is by mandating it, one, hopefully gets the counseling and support to these folks that desperately need it, but also possibly might identify some patterns where the authorities can come to bear on that, because you have these 50,000 student schools, and you may never see this person again. Well, this person may be repeating these actions multiple times across the campus. There's a lot of data that supports that may be going on, and even then when schools expel the person to go to another school.
When it comes to reporting, my students just did this last week, showed everybody, and they said, if you go to Joe or Todd, they have to report. And I said, no, any university employee reports. So
Right.
they were, just so you know, they were a little hazy.
Okay.
They weren't sure that it was and I said, no, if you go to
Any
anyone
university, yeah.
that works for the university.
Yeah, and I know I specifically said
Yeah.
that only counselors really are the only confidential, but.
Yeah.
Community leaders, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, student employees are, any
Student
student
employees,
employee.
yeah,
any student
I said
employee.
anybody employed by the university.
Yes.
And I think, and I mean, I learned that unfortunately the hard way, because we had one student report to one of our students, and not in their job or anything, but they're considered a university employee. She had to make that report. That student did not want that to be known to the university, and didn't really want to make that report, but we had to go through with it anyway. And so that's why I think it's important that you do try to, if possible, you catch them and just let them know, that you're there to support them. If that's what they want to do, that's great. They can continue. But a lot of times, I don't know, I say a lot of times, but there are times where they don't necessarily want that. They're looking for somebody to just kind of open up to, and they don't necessarily know that you have to make that report. And so I think it's only fair to them that they know that ahead of time, if at all possible.
and that seems like there might be still some gray area then, because a student worker, as you say, is an employee, but is that then impacted what their role is with that fellow student?
No, I mean,
It's
I
pretty
mean,
clear.
They're
It's not
student
just
employees,
crazy.
they're an employee, and they have to make that report.
Yeah. Even if it's off hours, if
Right.
they're.
Well, what I'm saying, that's,
Yeah.
first of all, I don't have to worry about that. I'm not a student, it's not my relationship at all,
Right.
No, it puts
but
them in a
for,
tough
It's a tough spot.
yeah.
I agree, and that's why I train my staff now to make sure that they are aware of that.
Sure.
Because I know, even though it's in the training,
And
we
I
all know
have,
how well some.
and I have student workers,
So,
so they need
Right.
to
I've
understand.
got 50 of them, they need to know,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Also remember, or be aware that this does not mean, one of the other changes in the law is that it was to try and empower the survivors.
Right.
This doesn't mean that they're gonna have to go and testify and do all those other things on campus here. They have the ability to say, I'm gonna be a reluctant witness. I realize that this has to be reported, because some of it's data collection, believe it or not, but if that student gets called in and they say, you know what, I didn't really want for this to, it's been reported and everything, but I don't want to participate in this, they have the ability to opt out. We give them some papers that talk about all the support, all the, not just here on campus, but in the community, all those types of things. But they do have a reluctant witness letter that they can get, and that kind of lets them stay out of it. It's just that we may have other witnesses that we may still be able to pull in and still pursue charges on somebody who's done that, particularly if it's a situation where we think that it's, happening to more than one person.
Okay, so are we just talking about sex crimes, or,
Yes.
so we're not talking about
Sexual
drugs on
harassment,
campus, or
Gender-based crimes. Gender-based crimes.
gender-based crime,
If
okay.
anything happens because of somebody's gender, I like to be saying gender on gender, but it's kind of sex-based.
Okay,
Including hate crimes, because that really broadens it up.
Title IX is more towards the gender, so it's not all.
But gender-based hate crimes are,
Yeah.
some of them are obvious.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that would fall. If it's
okay,
based on
so
gender.
if a student comes to one of us, an employee of the university, and says, my suite mate is selling cocaine out of a dorm room.
Doesn't fall under
this is-
this, you
don't
probably
have-
would still want
I
to
mean,
let
I'm just
Todd
thinking
know.
of something extreme,
Yeah, you're not required by law to report that, still be nice to
Yes.
Oh, wait, can I
They
say,
could just be selling beer. They can't sell beer either though. It could just be
Still
beer.
let me know on that.
I have another question.
Yes.
So sorry.
No, no,
Okay,
you're
so is this only apply to students? Student to student? So if there is a university employee, faculty, or staff?
It's anybody and everybody.
And be affiliated.
Even if it's not, it could be somebody off campus, but it's happening to a student or faculty or staff member.
Okay, so what about consensual sex between like a student and a staff or faculty member? Does that fall under this? I'm
No, there's reporting requirements that are required if you are an employee and are dating a student. There's you have to report that relationship's going on, and you have to ensure that there's no power differential. In other words, they can't be taking a class or working for you, any of those types of things. But that does not fall into consensual-based stuff. Does not fall under Title IX.
Okay.
It's some type of limiting of access to educational opportunities based on your gender.
So if one of us, even a student, is aware of a student and a faculty member or a staff member, are we required to report that?
I don't know that you're required to. It may be best practice to talk to somebody about it, to make sure that there isn't some type of power differential. But, their supervisor would hopefully be aware, because that's where the requirement is, that you report to your supervisor that you're having this relationship. And I mean, I've had, particularly, in my division, I have to get a lot of young employees. And over my 20 years, I've had an employee who dated a student, and their age was only 2 years different. Completely, it wasn't an issue. Came in and said, hey, we're just friends, this is moving forward. Like, okay, here's the information, you be careful. Can't hire this person as a student worker, and everything went on. So,
Okay, thank you.
you got somebody
I'm
got your eye on.
educated now. Yeah, I do.
All
And my
right,
back
so,
transparent.
they also have you covered fire and life safety, so, we talked a little bit about, just kind of contingency plans as it relates to weather types of events or, or something, as crazy as what just happened recently with that whole mixed up text message thing. If we had an event on campus and that had gone out and it was in a building and they said everybody out, do you have a plan in place to kind of account for everybody? I know we learned a lesson at the gym because my building manager tried to evacuate the building and did evacuate the building, but it took a really long time because she's like, everybody has headphones in, nobody's paying attention, and she's also about 8 tall. Probably didn't help her case, unfortunately. So we talked through at our recent building manager meeting about, well, what can we do to help facilitate so that people know that I even went as far as saying, like, if you got a text like that and we didn't know, if you hadn't found out and in a reasonable amount of time that was either a hoax or something had gone wrong. Like, if you need people out of the building and you think it's something very serious like that, pull the fire alarm. Like, I mean, I don't know that I would have thought of that in the heat of the moment, but as like, going forward, like, that's a way that, they'll figure it out when they start hearing alarms. So we talked through some different methods that we might be able to, expedite that process. But, if your students are having an event, do they have an area where everybody's going to go and gather? Like, do they have a roster of everybody that's there? Sometimes that might be feasible if it's like a contained environment, type group. Like, they're all traveling somewhere and it's maybe only 15 of them. You should have a travel roster so you know everybody that's there. But if it's just a large event like Fall Fest or something, like, there's no way to know who's all there and account for everybody. So we kind of talked through some of that kind of stuff, inclement weather. Sometimes it's as basic as, okay, you're having an event outside. Again, I'll pick on Fall Fest and it just comes to mind. But, so they have a backup location. They reserve the gym to make sure that, if there's inclement weather, they can move everybody inside in the event of that. Or we had it happen before back where we had to move people inside. So that kind of stuff happens. But sometimes our students are just like, we're going to have it outside. It's going to be great. Like, yeah. What happens if it's not? Like, we're asking you to plan these things like 2 weeks out or so you might not know what the weather's going to be like necessarily. Talk about the different resources in terms of, different things like lightning, weather, making sure that I think they have to sign up through student conference for the text alert system, but just kind of reminding them that they should be on CIE alert. That's going to be their best resource, at least on campus, for these types of emergencies. All right, then we talk about student travel, which is kind of an ongoing one, and certainly lots of rules and regs I think that come with that. So we talk about prefer rental vehicles if possible. We have a really great rental contract in terms of pricing at least, and so if they have that ability to go and rent a vehicle instead of taking their personal one, I kind of outline all the pros to that in terms of, the enterprise is going to be responsible for all the maintenance on that vehicle. If it breaks down somewhere, they'll go and get you a new one and swap it out. Because Alex just got in an accident on university business. Not his fault. Can attest. They'll come and they'll replace your car and everything. Like, nobody's doing that if you're just going down the road in your, Toyota Camry by yourself. So, and we also talk about sometimes you don't know what somebody's doing. Like, that person changed their oil recently. Do they have enough oil in their car? Do they I don't know what somebody else has done maintenance-wise for their vehicle, compared to enterprise where, again, even if something goes wrong, at least the liability is on them instead of on you as an individual or group.
Now, with enterprise, do we have?
They will not pick you up.
Yeah. With obviously they do cars and everything, but what about large groups? Do we have any sort of contract where, like large vehicle?
Like a bus or like 15-passenger van?
Yeah, like
any
any
vans, although we've learned recently that they will now charge you to get them from Hobby down here and back, or you can go pick them up yourself. Yeah, probably. Yeah. But yeah, in terms of like buses and stuff, I know Shelly does that with Salt Camp. She has a contact for like buses and stuff if you're talking a really big group. Core also, I think, uses that on occasion for the Martian kind of stuff. But yeah, you can do 15-passenger vans or even like Suburbans that'll hold like 8 people in here and stuff. Most of the time we don't have groups that are that large. Usually it's relatively small groups where they might have to take 2-3 vehicles. But yeah.
Can an 18-year-old student drive a enterprise 15-passenger van, provided they have the car training?
They will, I just had this situation last weekend. You have to be 21 to rent from Enterprise. And they told me that I was the only one because I was over 25, believe it or not.
Just happened.
That could drive one of the vehicles. So one of them was a little nicer than the others.
We've also gotten very mixed
Yes.
answers from them over the years. Like some people will allow like somebody under 21 to get them sometimes, and then other times they've come back and said, no, it's 21. I think 21 seems to be more consistently enforced.
Just
as
the,
of
so
late.
the university's contract with Enterprise is 21?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that works for me. I'll go to Enterprise though, and I'll sign off on 3 vans at the same time, and they'll be like, you're the only one allowed to drive them. And I'm like, that's right.
Yep. They do that all the
How are
time.
you getting 3
They
vans back? By yourself?
Well, that may be possible. I may drive. I may get shuttled there and back, but it's kind of like, I don't need 3 vans if I'm the only one driving them. But 21 versus 20 and some of that stuff.
Yeah.
They've walked in, they've taken my information, I'm there with 3 students that are gonna be driving these
Yeah.
vehicles, and they let them get in and they never check their
Yeah.
information.
Sure.
So,
It is we learned it's a training facility as well. So I think that's where we get some of our inconsistencies because they have a lot of new people coming through.
And 21 tends to be doable for all of us. 25 doesn't.
It's certainly better than I think their normal policy is 25
Okay.
to rent a vehicle, so it's at least brought it down a little bit, but we have run into some
Okay.
groups that don't have a lot of senior membership, being members.
Well, you know, so much
So-
of the stuff.
So we'll actually kind of go through, like, there are some alternatives, I mean, if they, obviously you have to have at least 1 driver, but, you know, at the bottom here, they recommend, and this is a recommendation, that they take a 15-minute break every 2 hours. You can also swap out drivers and stuff, and so if you get into that situation where if you're taking a really long trip and you don't have a lot of 21 and up drivers, you know, maybe they need to kind of account for it, and the crew team actually ran into this not too long ago. So we were basically saying, no, just go ahead and take your breaks, and that way you won't have to swap drivers, and we won't have to worry about that issue as much. So we've talked about alternative methods of transportation too. I mean, flying safer, so we do have some groups that have the wherewithal to fly their members, especially if they're going very long distances. Sometimes it can be just as economical as driving, just kind of depends on how many people you're taking and everything. If they are doing, I mean, either way, but especially if you're taking your own personal vehicle, you know, anticipating for emergency expenses. We've had groups that have gone pretty far out, I don't know if it's like El Paso or Laredo, or not Laredo, Lubbock or something like that, and they break down, and it's like, oh, okay, well, it was supposed to be a weekend trip. How are you getting back for classes on Monday? So, you know, a lot of times they don't, you know, we've all been 18 to 25, you know, you're invincible, nothing bad's ever going to happen, and, you know, until it does. So, so trying to kind of just say, hey, make sure you're aware that, you know, you want to make sure that you either have enough club funds or personal funds in order if you get flat tire or something, you know, you're not getting stuck and everybody's missing class and tests and whatnot. I definitely know transportation, open truck beds, using seatbelts, all that good stuff. Okay, so put this one on here. So I also talked a little bit about, you know, like if you know, a lot of times they'll say, okay, well we've got, you know, Alex, Danny, and Taylor, they're going to drive the first leg of our journey, okay? Well, if, you know, that morning, you know, a lot of times they're leaving early in the morning, especially if they got a really long trip, which is where we're tending to be a little bit more concerned about what they're doing as opposed to if it's just a, you know, short jaunt to like College Station or Houston or whatever, like not nearly as risky. But, you know, so a lot of times they'll leave pretty early in the morning, and so it's like, well, if you hear that, you know, so-and-so was up all night on Friday, whether it was studying and or other stuff, maybe you don't want that person taking that first leg of the journey. Like, okay, like let's find somebody else, like adjust your wheelhouse for them and say, okay, this person's driving, or hopefully you've already got that second driver and just, you know, it doesn't matter, then just swap them out and say, go ahead and have them drive, have the other person, you know, sleep or whatever they need to do, and then they can drive later. You know, also taking other physical, mental state, you know, maybe it's not even a physical exhaustion thing. What if they just had a family member pass away, or bad breakup with a boyfriend, girlfriend situation, you know. Some situations where their head's not necessarily totally going to be focused on the task at hand, which is driving, you might want to consider an alternative driver in that circumstance. So we can kind of talk a little bit about that, if they're at least aware of those types of situations potentially. You know, again, bad weather, making sure you have emergency vehicle access. Most of our groups, I don't think, are going to too many very remote places, but I mean, sometimes they do go to, you know, they go all over the place, and so making sure that they know what the emergency contact info is, and that they can get some access for EMS in the event of an accident or a situation that would require that.
And I had an example of a group, you know, that sometimes they may not be going very far, but they're trying to do the entire trip there and back in one day
Yeah.
with like a full day of activity in the middle. So, you know, we've got a group that here in a little bit is trying to go to San Antonio, go to SeaWorld, and come back in one day, which I understand they're trying to avoid, you know, hotel costs and things like that. They're looking at that from a budgetary side, but they only had 2 drivers for 2 cars. And so that's, you know, that's where I kind of came in and as an advisor, it would be a good place for you. And actually their advisor said something as well, just kind of said, you know, hey, that's a long day for 2 people to have to drive, you know, 8 hours plus spend a day at SeaWorld. So, so those are the kinds of things that as an advisor that you would want to look for.
Is there any limitations as far as the maximum number of hours per day that you can go on a trip, assuming that you have rotate drivers in and out? And
I don't think they really mention anything about that. I know there is, what is it, like 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. or something? It's kind of like, they recommend.
Recommendations.
Yeah, so there is a section in the student travel SAP or rule, one of those procedural things, where they actually list like recommendations.
But as long as you, let's say you avoided those times.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a recommendation. I mean, I think again, anytime you would be going against that, or if you just want to say, yeah, we'll go ahead and follow that. But even if you wanted to say, well, we're going to have people drive through the night. Okay, well, what's your plan to make sure that you're, you know, mitigating that issue? Like, are those people, we're going to know that those people are well rested, they're sleeping in the back, and then they're going to take over. We've got somebody in the seat next to them as a co-pilot to kind of help make sure that if we notice they start dozing off, all right, well, you're out, next person's up, kind of thing. So, and maybe they say like, we also have a contingency plan. If it just gets to be too much, we're going to pull over and we'll stop. You know, okay, well, that seems reasonable in order to avoid that recommendation of during those hours. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think it's, I want to say it's midnight to 6 a.m., something like that, or yeah, it's in kind of like that, wee hours in the morning time.
And they do have recommended hours, like if you're going to be driving more than this, you need to switch off drivers, have extra drivers.
Yeah, sure.
Taking those breaks
Yeah.
every 2 hours.
Yeah. Any other questions about travel? We're going on to the partay. Okay, so we do talk a little bit about behavior at parties, social events. I use this one because a lot of times we get questions about wearing, club gear, organization gear out while they're at parties and things, and a lot of groups like kind of have their own internal stuff where they say don't wear our shirts out or this or that. But also just like. This one's probably one of the more tricky ones, I guess, because a lot of times they want us to come up with some sort of hard and fast rule about like, well, if 10 people are in our organization and they all go to this party, like, is that a club event? Like, I don't know, like, maybe, like, depends on how you went about, like, organizing it. Like, did you organize it through official club communication, Facebook page kind of thing? Is there a group chat where everybody's like, like it says, salt camp people, like, and that's how you advertised all this stuff? Like, well, yeah, maybe it can be kind of construed as you're doing some sort of unofficial event or that it's an organizational type of thing. But, if not, like, I think it's especially tough here at TAMUG because, again, you're a small campus. So many of our students, like, yeah, they're friends with the people that they're in organizations. It makes sense. That's why they're in the organization. Like, so just kind of making sure that they understand, though, like, that if they are going on behalf of the organization to do different things, we talk about the Mardi Gras fundraisers in particular, where they're going to be around alcohol, and you have people from off campus that don't necessarily understand that college students can't have alcohol when they're on an official university trip. That they don't know our rules, and I just like try to explain to them, like, you can't expect somebody off in the community to understand all of our rules and policies and procedures. So you guys are going to have to be the ones to say, like, no, I can't, drink that me, or at the end of the night they'll say, oh, take whatever you want, and there's beads, and like, okay, that's fine, but there's also like, boxes of alcohol or cases, or bottles and stuff, and it's like, that you can't do because you're on university business, you're on an official, trip and everything, so, trying to kind of just help them understand that aspect. So, then talking to them, okay, yeah, you as either individual officers, or the entire organization can be held responsible if people do things that they're not supposed to do. I mean, I think one of the better examples I guess I can remember is that we had one where they were participating in Mardi Gras, and it ended up being it's actually a really good example of what the officers should have done, and because they did. But they noticed that two or three of their members or whatever had been like on the bottom part of the float, and had been given alcohol by some of the crew people, and they were drinking and everything. The officers went down and they said, hey, you can't do that, you gotta stop that, we can't, this is our organization trip, you can't do that. Went back upstairs and were doing the stuff that they're supposed to do in order to, fulfill their duties for that event. And people kept on doing it. We caught wind of it, we call them in, and they're like, hey, we told them they couldn't do it when they were there. We had a meeting beforehand that said, no alcohol, you guys need to be on your best behavior, here are the rules and everything. We also, oh, did you give them this presentation where you talk about that stuff? Like, yeah, we did. Like, okay, let's pull out your list. And so pull out their list. Those people had been on it. So they've done a number of things to try and make sure that scenario didn't happen and play out. So those officers ultimately weren't held responsible. It fell back on those individual members as just students essentially going out and violating a university rule. So now, had the officers not done that, or they were helping facilitate the drinking and all that, well then they may have been held, or probably would have been held, responsible for that. So that's why we kind of try to encourage, like, you guys need to step up and do the right thing, be Aggies like we expect you to. Okay. I think this is the last section. So we also just talk about, like, if they have individuals that have disabilities within their organization, they are required by state and federal law to make reasonable accommodations for those individuals. And so if that means that they're traveling someplace and that person wants to participate, that they need to make arrangements to have whether they need a special vehicle or whatnot. Encourage them to make use of Dana Little and Ken's office, to maybe she can help be a kind of a liaison to assist in terms of maybe some accommodations, and methods that we can use to help make sure that person can participate in whatever program that they're looking to participate in. I even go as far as saying, not that I want to necessarily vouch for Shelley or Todd's budget, but if it's a club sport type of thing, like, listen, if it's a matter of cost or something like that, come talk to us. There's probably things that we can do to help make sure that we're being inclusive and that we're including these individuals. If it's just simply a matter of we don't have the funds to do that. I think that our office is very, open to doing something like that if we can come up with reasonable, ways to accommodate.
Joe, there is a budget pool for
Yeah.
some things like that. If
There you go.
it's not
Yeah.
small, but we can
Yeah.
possibly,
Right.
if the situation's right, we can figure out a way to do it.
And that's pretty much it. So then, then they're told that they, again, according to state law, they need to present this within 45 days of having the training to their membership. It needs to be pretty much their full membership. If they don't have their full membership, they need to impose reasonable sanctions, which would really just say, like, just have another training and get them through the training. Is much more reasonable usually. And then they submit basically that roster and sign-in sheet to Shelley for our records. Which we keep for 3 years. Any questions?